Have you ever held on to a memory so tight it hurts, yet somehow keeps you going? Hey there, my dear friends. It's Eva, your 65-year-old storyteller from the cozy town of Eufaula, Alabama. I'm sipping sweet tea on my porch, thinking of y'all, my lovely ladies who've seen life's highs and lows. Today, I'm stepping into the shoes of Maggie Sullivan, a woman whose heart and grit will feel like a warm hug. I'll tell her story as if I'm her, sharing every tear and triumph, so we can all feel her journey. If these tales touch your soul, hit that subscribe button to join our storytelling family. Now, grab your coffee or quilt, settle in, and let's walk through Maggie's 30-year odyssey of love, loss, and finding her light. Ready, here we go. The dining room smelled of slightly burnt dinner rolls and desperation. I sat at the table in Laura's modest house in Portsmouth's South End. My hands folded tightly in my lap, the weight of 30 years pressing against my chest. The cream-colored envelope that had arrived weeks ago, Laura's handwriting as familiar as my own heartbeat, still lingered in my mind. It had been a shock. That letter, arriving just months after the Portsmouth Herald splashed my face across its pages, calling me the local woman who turned dreams into reality with Broner's Haven Books. Some coincidences are too perfect to ignore. I'm Margaret Sullivan Maggie to my friends 65 years old, and until recently, invisible to my only child. Across the table, Laura Whittaker, once Laura Sullivan, fussed with a mismatched set of wine glasses, her smile as brittle as the thin crystal in her hand. Her husband, Edward, sat at the head, his tailored suit a touch too tight, his eyes darting to his phone every few seconds. Their children, Sophie and Daniel, flanked them. Sophie with her artist's intensity, Daniel with the stiff posture of a man who'd just lost his footing. The table was set for a family reunion, but it felt more like a negotiation. More wine? Mom, Laura asked, her voice bright but strained, as if she could will this evening into normalcy. She held up a bottle of cheap Merlot, the kind you'd find on sale at Hannaford's. Just water, thanks, I said, keeping my tone even. I caught Sophie's glance sharp, curious, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She was 28, with my mother's stubborn chin and a gaze that saw through facades. Daniel, 30, avoided my eyes, his fingers tapping the tablecloth. The room was small, the walls a faded beige that hadn't been painted in years. A mahogany dining table, clearly a relic from their old mansion, dominated the space, its polished surface clashing with the chipped baseboards. Outside, the November dusk settled over Portsmouth, the last golden leaves of fall clinging to the trees. I could hear the faint hum of traffic from Route 1, a reminder that life moved on beyond this strained gathering. Edward cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Maggie, it's been a while. You're looking well. His voice had that polished edge, the kind he'd used to charm investors before his financial firm imploded under federal scrutiny. I'm doing all right, I replied, meeting his gaze. His eyes were weary, calculating, searching for an opening. I knew why I was here. The headlines had been relentless. Whittaker Partners, faces, fraud charges. Their assets were frozen, their mansion on the market. This wasn't a family dinner, it was a plea. Laura set down the wine bottle, her hands trembling slightly. I'm so glad you could come, she said, her eyes flickering to me then away. It's been too long. 30 years is... Well, it's a lifetime, isn't it? 30, I echoed, the word heavy on my tongue. I thought of the birthday cards I'd sent, returned unopened, the Christmas gifts a handmade quilt, a silver locket stacked in my attic, the times I'd parked across the street from their old house, watching Laura in her garden, her belly round with Sophie, then Daniel, my grandchildren I'd never met until tonight. 30 years of silence, broken only by a letter that smelled of ink and ulterior motives. Sophie leaned forward, her fork clinking against her plate. So, Grandma, I read about your bookstore, Broner's Haven. Right, sounds like a cool place. I've been meaning to stop by. Her tone was genuine, but there was a challenge in it, like she was testing the waters. It's a labor of love, I said, softening a little. We've got books for every mood, a coffee bar, and a corner for kids to read. You should come by. Sophie, bring your sketchbook. She smiled, a real one, not like her mother's. I might just do that. Daniel shifted in his seat, his tie loosened. Business must be good. Then, he said, his voice careful, I saw the article in the Herald. Said you've got 3 locations now. 2, I corrected, the main one in Market Square and a smaller shop in Dover. The 3rd's just a dream for now. I kept my tone light, but I felt the shift in the room, the way Edward's posture straightened, the way Laura's fingers tightened around her glass. That's impressive, Edward said, leaning in. Real estate in Market Square isn't cheap. You must be doing quite well for yourself. Maggie, ever think about investing in something new? Something secure. There it was, the pitch. I'd known it was coming, but hearing it still felt like a slap. I took a sip of water, letting the moment stretch, the ice clinking softly in my glass. The room was warm, too warm. The smell of turkey and overcooked green beans thick in the air. I invest in things that matter, I said finally, looking straight at him. Community projects, small businesses run by folks who don't cut corners, not schemes that destroy families. Edward's face flushed, a vein pulsing at his temple. Laura shot him a warning glance, but he pressed on. That's a bit harsh. Don't you think we're just talking opportunities here? Maggie, family helping family. Family. I repeated, the word tasting bitter. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing the worn leather of the album I'd brought. It was heavy, not just with paper, but with 30 years of hope and heartbreak. I placed it on the table, the thud drawing every eye in the room. What's that? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Open it, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She hesitated, then lifted the cover. The first page held a letter I'd written on her 25th birthday, begging her to call. Next, a photo I'd taken from across the street at Sophie's 5th birthday party, her small face pressed against a bouncy castle window. Then a newspaper clipping about Daniel's high school graduation, my only glimpse of him in a cap and gown, page after page. A chronicle of my efforts to stay connected, all met with silence. Laura's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Sophie leaned over, her breath catching. Daniel stared at the table, his jaw tight. Edward's expression hardened, but he said nothing. 30 years, I said softly. Every card, every gift, every moment I tried to reach you, you sent them back. Laura, or ignored them. But I kept trying, because you were my daughter, you still are. But I'm not here to be your bank account. Laura's eyes filled with tears, her fingers gripping the album. Mom, I didn't know you kept all this, didn't you? I asked, my voice gentle but unyielding. Or did you just choose not to see enough of this? Edward snapped, pushing back from the table. You come here, Maggie, acting like some martyr, dangling your money in front of us, then pulling it away. You think you're better than us because you got lucky with a bookstore. Lucky, I said, my voice rising for the first time. You think 30 years of scraping by, of working double shifts, of building something from nothing is luck. I didn't get lucky. Edward. I got up every morning and chose to keep going, even when my own daughter called me nothing. Sophie stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Can we all just stop pretending this isn't a family dinner? It's a transaction, Mom, you invited Grandma because we're broke. Grandma, you brought that album to make a point. Let's at least be honest. The room fell silent. Sophie's words hanging like smoke. She was right, and it stung. I'd come to end this cycle, to stop pretending we were something we weren't. But looking at Laura's tear-streaked face, I felt a pang of something softer, something I thought I'd buried long ago. Sophie, Laura whispered, her voice breaking. That's not fair, isn't it? Sophie shot back. You didn't even mention Grandma until that article came out. Now we're all here, acting like we've missed each other for 30 years. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. Sophie, ease up. Mom's trying what Sophie demanded. To fix things, or to fix our bank account. I raised a hand, cutting through the tension. Enough, I said, my voice calm but firm. I didn't come here to fight. I came to be honest. Laura, you invited me because you're in trouble. I understand that, but I'm not here to save you from choices you made. I've spent 30 years saving myself. Laura's tears spilled over, silent but heavy. She closed the album, her fingers lingering on the cover. I thought we could start over, she said, her voice barely audible. I thought you'd want to help. I wanted my daughter, I said, my throat tightening. Not a deal. Edward snorted, turning away to stare out the window. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear. Sophie watched me, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of respect in her eyes. I stood, smoothing my simple navy dress, the one I'd bought for my bookstore's 10th anniversary. I should go, I said. This isn't comfortable for any of us. Laura stood too, reaching out but stopping short of touching me. Mom, please, don't leave like this. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the woman who'd hurt me, but the girl I'd raised, the one who'd clung to my hand in Market Square, laughing under Christmas lights. The pain was still there, a scar that would never fade, but so was the love, stubborn and unyielding. Goodbye, Laura, I said softly. I nodded to Sophie and Daniel, then walked to the door, my steps steady despite the ache in my chest. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky a deep indigo streaked with gold. My driver, a quiet man named Joe, opened the door of my black sedan. I slid inside, the warmth of the car a contrast to the chill I felt. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the house, at the silhouette of Laura standing in the doorway. I'd said what I needed to say. For the first time in 30 years, I felt free. But freedom, I'd learned, comes with its own kind of loneliness. I thought of that night 30 years ago, standing in the rain outside Laura's mansion, her words echoing in my ears. You're nothing but a jealous waitress. I'd driven home to my empty apartment, surrounded by a life I'd built for her, and realized the person I'd sacrificed everything for had discarded me like an old coat. That night, I'd cried until there was nothing left. Then, in the quiet of dawn, I'd made a promise to become something for myself. Now, as the car wound through Portsmouth streets, past the twinkling lights of Market Square, I wondered if Laura would ever understand what she'd lost, or if I'd ever stop hoping she would. Thank you for diving into Maggie's story, a tale of heartbreak, resilience, and the courage to stand tall. If this moment at the Thanksgiving table moved you, please hit that subscribe button to join us for more stories that tug at the heartstrings. Drop a comment below. Did you feel Maggie's strength when she laid that album on the table? Or did Laura's tears pull at you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. The rain tapped against my apartment window, a soft, relentless rhythm that matched the ache in my chest. It was 1995 and I was 37, standing in my cramped kitchen in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Laura's words from that awful night at her housewarming party still echoed in my head. You're nothing but a jealous waitress, who can't stand that I've made something of myself, I'd left her Georgian mansion in a daze, my discount dress soaked through, waiting for a bus that seemed to take forever. I'd expected a call the next day, an apology, something to stitch us back together. It never came. I'm Maggie Sullivan, and for 30 years, I carried that silence like a stone in my pocket. But to understand how we got there, to that Thanksgiving table where I laid down my heart in a leather-bound album, you have to go back to the beginning, to the years when Laura was my whole world, when every choice I made was for her. The kitchen in our old apartment on Middle Street was barely big enough for a table, but it was ours. In '75, I was 25, a single mum with a 4-year-old who thought the world was made of magic. Laura would climb onto a wobbly chair, her tiny hands dusted with flour, trying to help me make biscuits. The radio crackled with Bohemian Rhapsody, and she'd giggle, singing along to words she didn't understand. Those were the days when my hands were raw from double shifts at the Rusty Anchor, a diner off Lafayette Road, and my nights were spent scrubbing floors at Portsmouth High. But when I looked at Laura, her brown curls bouncing as she danced, I felt like I could do anything. Her father, Tom, had walked out when she was 3, leaving me with a stack of bills and a broken heart. I made a vow then, silent but fierce, Laura would never go without. Not food, not a warm bed, not the chance to dream bigger than I ever could. So I went without, instead skipped meals to buy her ballet shoes. Wore the same coat for a decade so she could go to summer camp. Sold my mother's gold locket to pay for her SAT prep. Every dollar I earned at the diner, every tip stuffed into my apron, went toward her future. Mom, why don't you ever get new shoes? Laura asked one evening in 1980. She was 9, sitting cross-legged on our threadbare couch, her eyes wide with that blunt curiosity kids have. My sneakers were held together with duct tape, the soles worn thin from years of running between tables. These are just fine, I said, ruffling her hair. Besides, we're saving for that art camp you want, right? She nodded, but I saw the flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. It stung, but I pushed it down. Kids notice things they don't always understand. I told myself it didn't matter, as long as she had what she needed. By the time Laura was in high school, she was blooming smart, talented, with a laugh that could light up a room. She joined the debate team, took AP classes, and dreamed of studying abroad. I worked harder, picking up extra shifts, my back aching, my hands chapped from bleach. When she got into the University of New Hampshire, I cried harder than she did, clutching her acceptance letter like it was a medal. You did it, baby, I whispered, hugging her tight in our tiny living room. The TV flickered with an old episode of Cheers, and outside, the spring breeze carried the salty tang of the Piscataqua River. No. Mom, you did it, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. For a moment, I believed we were unbreakable. But college changed things. Laura met Edward Whittaker her senior year, a business major from old money, with a sharp smile and opinions that filled every room. I noticed it right away, the way she grew quieter around him, her edges softening to fit his mold. Edward thinks I should wear my hair up, she'd say. Or Edward says political science is a better major than art history. I bit my tongue, telling myself it was just a phase, that my bright, opinionated girl would find her way back. When they got engaged, I sold my grandmother's silver ring, the last piece of family I had left, to buy a dress that wouldn't embarrass her at the wedding. Standing in that cathedral in downtown Portsmouth, surrounded by people who measured worth by designer labels and vacation homes, I felt like a ghost. Edward's mother, dripping in pearls, barely looked at me. Which table are you at? Dear, she asked, as if I were a stray guest, not the mother of the bride. I swallowed it all for Laura, smiling through the champagne toasts, clapping as Edward's father stepped in for the father-daughter dance where Tom should have been. But as the months passed, I saw her slipping away. Our weekly lunches became monthly, then rare. She talked about charity galas and renovations, while I shared stories from the diner, feeling the gap between us widen like a river after a storm. The breaking point came at their housewarming party in 1995, a lavish affair in their sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. I arrived in my best dress second-hand, but I'd ironed it carefully only to find myself serving drinks and clearing plates while Laura mingled with guests who didn't know my name. I found her alone in the kitchen, her mascara smudged, a faint bruise on her wrist quickly hidden by her sleeve. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I asked, my heart lurching. "Nothing. Mom," she said, too quickly. "Just stress. Edward wants everything perfect for his clients tonight." "Laura," I said, stepping closer, "you don't sound like yourself. When was the last time you did something you wanted? This isn't the daughter I raised. That man is controlling you, and I'm worried." Her face hardened, fury replacing the vulnerability. "How dare you? Edward has given me everything: a home, security, respect. What have you ever given me except embarrassment? Do you know his mother thought you were the help tonight?" The words cut deeper than I could have imagined. "I gave you everything I had," I said, my voice shaking. "Every late night, every missed meal, every dream I let go of it was for you, and I'm still here, telling you what you need to hear. That man doesn't love you. He owns you. Get out." Laura's eyes blazed. "You're jealous because I have what you never could. A real life. You're just a bitter, aging waitress who couldn't keep a husband. I don't want you in my life anymore. You're toxic, always trying to make me feel guilty for being happy." I reached for her, but she stepped back, her face cold as marble. "Get out," she said. I left in a fog, my purse forgotten on her countertop. Outside, the rain poured, soaking through my dress as I waited for the bus. My body was numb, but my mind replayed her words over and over. I'd raised her, loved her, given her every piece of me, and in one moment, she'd thrown it all away. The next day, I called, hoping her anger had cooled. The line was disconnected. I sent a letter, then another. Both returned. 6 months later, I drove by their house and saw Laura in the garden, her belly swollen with Sophie. I called her name. She looked up, our eyes meeting for a fleeting second, then turned and walked inside. That was when I knew this wasn't a fight. It was an amputation. Back in my apartment, surrounded by Laura's old drawings taped to the fridge, her ballet shoes in a box under my bed. I broke. I cried until my throat was raw, until there was nothing left but a hollow quiet. In that dawn, I made a new vow: if I was nothing to her, I'd become something to myself. Those years of sacrifice weren't just about money or time. They were about love, the kind that burns so bright it blinds you to your own needs. I'd built my life around Laura, every choice a brick in the foundation of her future. When she tore it down, I had to learn who Maggie Sullivan was without her. That night in 1995, as the rain fell and my heart shattered, I didn't know I'd spend the next 30 years answering that question. But I did know one thing: I wasn't done fighting. The memory of that night clung to me as I sat at that Thanksgiving table in 2025, watching Laura's tears fall. The album between us like a bridge we'd both burned. I'd come to close a chapter, to stop pretending we were a family when we hadn't been for decades. But as I looked at her, at Sophie's curious eyes, at Daniel's quiet shame, I wondered if some stories don't end, they just change. The bell above the door at Broner's Haven Books jingled softly, a sound that had become my lifeline. It was a crisp October morning in 2025, and I stood behind the counter in my bookstore on Market Square, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, arranging a display of new releases. The air smelled of fresh coffee and old paper, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. At 65, I'd built a life I was proud of: a cozy shop, a community that felt like family, a savings account that no longer kept me awake at night. But 30 years ago, when Laura cut me out of her life, this world was unimaginable. Back then, I was just Maggie Sullivan, a woman trying to survive the void her daughter left behind. Those 30 years weren't just empty, they were a map of grief. With valleys I thought I'd never climb out of, and plateaus where I learned to breathe again. To understand how I went from that rain-soaked night in 1990 when Laura called me a bitter waitress, to the woman who faced her at that Thanksgiving table. You have to walk through those years with me. They were hard, but they made me who I am. The first Christmas after Laura shut me out was the worst. I volunteered for a double shift at the Rusty Anchor, the diner where I'd worked for nearly 2 decades, so my co-workers could be with their families. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the jukebox played Jingle Bell Rock on a loop. I refilled coffee cups and wiped down sticky tables, my apron heavy with tips I didn't care about. My manager, Dottie, a gruff woman with a heart bigger than she let on, gave me a worried look as I scrubbed the counter for the 3rd time. "Maggie, go home," she said, her hands on her hips. "It's Christmas. Put your feet up." "Home's too quiet," I replied, forcing a smile. I'd rather stay busy. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was where Laura used to be. Our old apartment on Middle Street felt like a museum of her childhood. With her crayon drawings still taped to the fridge and her ballet shoes tucked in a box under my bed, I couldn't bear to look at them, but I couldn't throw them away either. So I worked, avoided family restaurants where grandmothers doted on toddlers, and changed the channel when diaper commercials came on. I trained myself not to imagine what my grandchildren might look like. I learned about Sophie's birth from a tiny announcement in the Portsmouth Herald: Sophie Ann Whittaker, born to Laura and Edward Whittaker. March 15th, 1919. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the grainy newspaper, my coffee growing cold, my first grandchild, and I hadn't even known Laura was pregnant. I spent 3 months stitching a quilt for Sophie, each square a prayer for a connection I'd never have. When I mailed it, it came back unopened, the word return scrawled in Laura's handwriting. For Daniel, born 2 years later. I sent nothing but a silent wish across the city. The years blurred together, a monotony of survival. I turned 40, then 45, my hair grayed, and I stopped dyeing it. What was the point when the only person whose opinion mattered had erased me? I kept working at the diner, where regulars became a kind of surrogate family. There was Mr. Finch, who came every Tuesday for meatloaf and told stories about his days as a fisherman. Widow Jenkins brought me homemade blueberry jam and always asked, "How you holding up?" Maggie, with a look that said she knew more than I let on. College kids, studying late over bottomless coffee, called me their diner mom, asking for advice on breakups or job interviews. "You're a natural." Maggie, one of them, a bright-eyed girl named Sarah, said one night in 2000, "You should have been a counselor or something." "Just lived a lot of life, honey," I replied, refilling her cup. But her words stuck with me, a seed planted in barren soil. I lived frugally, saving every penny out of habit, a holdover from years of single motherhood, without Laura to spend it on. I didn't know what the money was for, but it gave me a sense of control in a world that felt anything but. Once a month. I drove past Laura's mansion in the South End, a self-inflicted wound to keep the pain fresh. I'd see Sophie and Daniel playing in the yard, Sophie with her paint-splattered overalls, Daniel tall like his father but with Laura's expressive eyes. On Sophie's 10th birthday, I parked across the street, watching clowns and ponies entertain a crowd of laughing kids. Sophie's face, lit with joy, pressed against the bouncy castle window. For a moment, our eyes met, and I wondered if some instinct stirred in her, if blood could call to blood. Then Laura appeared, her hand on Sophie's shoulder, scanning the street with narrowed eyes. I drove away before she could spot me. Time moved strangely in those empty years. Months would pass in a haze of routine work, sleep, repeat, then a single moment would stop everything, spotting Laura at the grocery store and ducking behind a cereal display. Overhearing a customer at the diner mention the Whitakers' latest European vacation. Each one was a reminder that Laura's life went on without me, while mine was stuck in the shadow of her absence. I filled the void with small rituals. Sunday mornings, I'd walk along Prescott Park, feeding the ducks and imagining a world where grandkids called me Nana. Thursday evenings, I took community college classes, first accounting, then business management. The textbooks were heavy, the assignments daunting, but they gave me something to hold on to. My accounting professor, a kind man with wire-rimmed glasses, pulled me aside after I aced an exam in 2005. "You're one of our best students. Maggie," he said. "Most folks your age aren't this driven. What's your goal?" I didn't tell him I wasn't chasing a career. I was building a life raft. "Just want to keep learning," I said. And he nodded like he understood. Slowly, the grief began to shift not into acceptance, because I'd never accept being cut out of my family, but into something harder, like steel forged in fire. If I couldn't be a mother or grandmother, I'd find out who else Maggie Sullivan could be. I volunteered at the Portsmouth Public Library, reading to elderly shut-ins who reminded me of my own mother. I joined a hiking group, my legs burning as I climbed the trails of the White Mountains, discovering strength I didn't know I had. I opened a savings account I called my Someday Fund, a quiet dream I barely dared to name. "You should open that bookstore you're always talking about," Dottie said one night in 2010 as we counted the register at the diner. "You've got the head for numbers and the heart for stories. It's perfect." The bookstore dream had started as a whisper, something I'd mentioned to Laura once during her college years. She'd laughed, saying, "Mom, bookstores are dying. Stick to what you know." Her dismissal had stung, but now it fueled me. If Laura thought I couldn't do it, I'd prove her wrong, not for her, but for me. By 2015, 20 years into the void, I'd settled into a life that wasn't whole but had shape. I worked, saved, studied, and guarded my heart against hope. Hope was a trap, a setup for fresh disappointment. Then came a Christmas card from Laura, her handwriting unmistakable. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting a miracle. Inside was a formal family portrait: Laura, Edward, 16-year-old Sophie, 14-year-old Daniel, posed in front of their grand staircase. No note, just a pre-printed happy holidays from the Whitakers. I stared at it for hours, searching for meaning. Was it a gesture, a reminder, or just a way to ease her guilt the next day? An invitation to Daniel's piano recital arrived. I went. Sitting in the back of the Whitmore Academy auditorium, my heart pounding as he played Chopin with precision but no feeling. Afterward, I saw Laura across the room. Our eyes met, and she turned away, ushering her family out a side door. That was the new void, not absence, but acknowledgement without connection. Over the years, more cards and invitations came, always formal, never personal. I was a distant satellite in their orbit, allowed to watch but never to land. I attended every event I was invited to: recitals, graduations. Sophie's art shows always from a distance, never approaching. They were crumbs, and I collected them in my album, a record of a family I loved but didn't belong to. Sitting in Broner's Haven books that October morning, I ran my fingers over the worn spine of Pride and Prejudice, a book I'd read to Laura as a girl. The shop was quiet, the hum of Market Square outside a comforting backdrop. I'd built this place from nothing, turned my someday fund into a reality, but the album in my office, hidden in a drawer, was a reminder of what I'd lost. 30 years had shaped me, hollowed me out, and filled me with something stronger than grief. When Laura's letter arrived, inviting me to Thanksgiving, I knew it wasn't about love. It was about need. And for the first time, I was ready to face her, not as the mother she'd discarded, but as the woman I'd become. The scent of roasted coffee beans filled Broner's Haven books, mingling with the crisp October air that slipped through the open door. It was 2025, and I stood behind the counter in my bookstore on Market Square. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, arranging a stack of Jane Austen novels for a book club display. At 65, I'd carved out a life that felt like mine, a cozy shop with creaky hardwood floors, a community that gathered for poetry readings, and a quiet pride in what I'd built. But 30 years ago, when Laura cut me out of her life, this place was just a dream I didn't dare speak aloud. Now, a cream-colored envelope sat in my office drawer, Laura's handwriting a ghost from that lost time. It had arrived weeks ago, an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, and it stirred something in me I thought I'd buried hope, sharp and dangerous. That letter wasn't just paper and ink. It was a question after 30 years of silence. What did Laura want? I knew the answer, or thought I did. When I read the Portsmouth Herald article about Edward Whittaker's firm collapsing under fraud charges, their mansion was on the market, their assets frozen. But as I prepared to face her, to lay down the album of my unreturned efforts at that Thanksgiving table, I had to confront the weight of that letter and what it meant for both of us. The morning it arrived, I was restocking the children's section, kneeling beside a shelf of picture books. The bell above the door jingled, and Tom Rivera, my right-hand man at the shop, called out, "Mail's here." Maggie Tom was a wiry man in his 50s, a former editor who'd fallen on hard times before I hired him. He handed me a small stack, and there it was. On top, a cream-colored envelope, my name in Laura's elegant script. My hands froze, the rest of the mail slipping to the floor. "You okay?" Tom asked, his brow furrowing. "Looks like you saw a ghost." "Might as well have," I muttered, tucking the envelope into my apron pocket. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. Instead, I busied myself with customers, ringing up a mystery novel for Mr. Finch, chatting with a mom about story time for her toddler. But the envelope burned against my hip, a reminder of 30 years of unanswered letters, returned gifts, and stolen glimpses of Laura's life. That night, in my small apartment above the shop, I sat at my kitchen table, a mug of chamomile tea cooling beside me. The envelope lay unopened, its edges slightly curled. Outside, the lights of Market Square twinkled, and the distant hum of traffic on Congress Street filled the quiet. I thought of Clara Nguyen, my best friend, a retired teacher who'd been my anchor through the empty years. "Don't let hope hurt you again." "Maggie," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, won out. I slit the envelope with a butter knife, my hands trembling. Inside was a single card, embossed with a generic "You're invited" in gold foil. Thanksgiving dinner at the Whittaker residence, 4 p.m., November the 27th, 2025. Below, in Laura's handwriting, "It's been too long. Mom, please come. I miss you." The words hit like a punch, soft but bruising. "I miss you." After 30 years, 3 words to bridge a chasm I'd spent decades navigating alone. I closed the card, my fingers tracing the ink, and let myself remember. Portsmouth, 1995. The rain was relentless, soaking through my dress as I stood outside Laura's mansion, her words ringing in my ears. "You're nothing but a jealous waitress." I'd driven home to my apartment, the wipers slapping against the windshield of my old Chevy, and collapsed on the couch. The silence was louder than her anger, a void that swallowed the life I'd built around her. I'd sent letters, birthday cards, a quilt for Sophie's birth, all returned or ignored. 6 months later, I saw her in her garden, pregnant, and called her name. She looked at me, then turned away, closing the door on any chance of reconciliation. That memory was why I didn't trust the letter. I knew about Edward's troubles. The Herald had been brutal, detailing his firm's Ponzi scheme, the clients he'd swindled, the millions lost. Laura's invitation wasn't about missing me. It was about survival. And yet, a part of me, the part that still saw her as the girl who'd clung to my hand in Market Square, wanted to believe otherwise. I called Clara the next morning, meeting her at Popovers, a cozy cafe across from my shop. She was 70, her black hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp behind bifocals, over lattes and blueberry scones. I showed her the letter. "She's got some nerve," Clara said, setting the card down. 30 years, and now she misses you. Right when her husband's in the papers, I know. I said, stirring my coffee. But what if there's more to it? What if she's really sorry? Clara raised an eyebrow. "Maggie, you've got a heart bigger than this town. But don't let it blind you. Laura's in a corner. People do funny things when they're desperate. I'm not naive." I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I need to know. If I don't go, I'll always wonder. She sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Then go. But take that album of yours. Show her what she's missed, not to hurt her, but to remind yourself who you are, the album." I'd started it after Sophie's birth. A leather-bound book filled with every letter I'd sent, every photo I'd taken from a distance, every newspaper clipping about Laura's family. It was my proof that I'd never stopped trying, even when she'd stopped caring. Clara was right. If I was going to face Laura, I needed it, not as a weapon, but as a shield. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were a blur. I threw myself into the shop, planning a holiday book drive for kids in need. Tom helped me set up a display of winter-themed novels, his quiet humor a balm. "You're going to wear yourself out, Maggie," he said one evening, catching me reorganizing the same shelf twice. "Keeps me from thinking too much," I admitted, handing him a stack of The Snow Child. He nodded, his eyes kind. "You're going to that dinner, aren't you?" The one from the letter. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I have to." "Then you'll be fine," he said. "You're tougher than you look." Tough wasn't the word I'd use. Determined, maybe, or stubborn, like my mother, who'd raised me alone after my father died. I spent evenings in my apartment, flipping through the album, each page a reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd gained. Broner's Haven Books was more than a shop. It was my heart, poured into every worn leather chair, every handwritten book recommendation. I'd built it from nothing, turning my someday fund into a reality. If Laura thought she could waltz back into my life for a bailout, she was about to meet a different Maggie Sullivan. The day before Thanksgiving, I sat in my office, the album open on my desk. A photo of Sophie at her high school art show caught my eye, her standing beside a vibrant painting. Her smile so like Laura's at that age. I'd been there, in the back row, invisible. Would she recognize me now? Would Daniel, who'd only seen me in passing at his piano recitals? I closed the album, my resolve hardening. I wasn't going to beg for their love. I was going to show them who I was. Portsmouth, 2015. A Christmas card arrived, the first contact from Laura in 20 years. I tore it open, my heart racing, only to find a formal family portrait, no note, just happy holidays from the Whitakers. I stared at Laura's face, older but still beautiful, and felt the old wound reopen. The next day, an invitation to Daniel's recital came. I went, my hands shaking as I watched him play, his fingers precise but emotionless. Laura was there, across the room. Our eyes met, and she turned away. That was the new pain, not absence, but acknowledgement without connection. That memory fueled me as I prepared for Thanksgiving. I chose a navy dress, simple but elegant, and packed the album in my purse. Joe, my driver, picked me up at 3, his quiet presence steadying me. As we drove through Portsmouth, past the twinkling lights of Market Square, I rehearsed what I'd say. Not accusations, not pleas, just truth. Laura's house in the South End was a far cry from her old mansion. The siding was faded, the yard unkempt, a basketball hoop tilting over the driveway. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of turkey and tension. Laura greeted me with a nervous hug, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. Edward shook my hand, his grip too firm. Sophie offered a cautious smile. Daniel a stiff nod. The table was set with mismatched plates, a relic of their former wealth clashing with their new reality. As we sat, Laura's voice filled the silence, bright and brittle. "Mom, it's so good to have you here. It's been too long, 30 years. I said, my voice steady, a lifetime. Edward leaned in, his smile practiced. "Maggie, I hear your bookstore's thriving. Ever think about investing in something new?" And there it was, the real reason I was here. I reached for the album, my heart pounding, ready to lay bare the truth of those 30 years. The snow fell gently outside Broner's Haven Books, blanketing Market Square in a quiet hush. It was December, and I stood by the shop's front window, watching families bustle through Portsmouth, their arms full of holiday bags. At 65, I'd grown used to the rhythm of my life, the creak of the bookstore's hardwood floors, the chatter of customers, the warmth of a coffee mug in my hands. But after that Thanksgiving dinner, where I'd laid my album of 30 years' worth of unreturned love on Laura's table, something had shifted. The cream-colored envelope that started it all was just the beginning. Now, a new invitation had arrived, this time for Christmas, and with it came a question I wasn't sure I could answer. Could we rebuild something after all this time? The Thanksgiving confrontation had been a reckoning, a moment where I'd stood up for the woman I'd become. But as the weeks passed, Laura's tear-streaked face lingered in my mind, along with Sophie's blunt honesty and Daniel's quiet shame. I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but I couldn't deny the pull of possibility. Fragile as a snowflake on a warm palm. The letter came a week after Thanksgiving, tucked among the usual bills and holiday catalogues. I found it on my desk at the bookstore, Laura's handwriting unmistakable. My heart stuttered, but I didn't open it right away. Instead, I busied myself with the shop, helping Tom Rivera set up a display for our annual holiday book drive. The air smelled of pine from the small Christmas tree in the corner, and Bing Crosby's White Christmas played softly over the speakers. "You've been staring at that envelope like it's going to bite you," Tom said, leaning against the counter. He was 55, his dark hair flecked with grey, his editor's eye always catching what I tried to hide. "It might," I said, managing a smile. "It's from Laura." His eyebrows shot up. "After that Thanksgiving showdown, she's got guts. Or desperation," I said, my voice quieter. I hadn't told Tom everything, just that I'd gone to dinner, and it hadn't ended well. But he knew me well enough to see the weight I carried. "Open it." "Maggie," he urged, "you'll drive yourself crazy wondering." That night, in my apartment above the shop, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of peppermint tea steaming beside me. The envelope felt heavier than it should, its edges crisp under my fingers. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muffling the sounds of Market Square. I slit it open, bracing myself. Inside was a simple card, adorned with a watercolor snowflake. Christmas dinner at the Whittaker residence, 300 p.m., December 25th, 2025. Laura's note was brief, just me, Sophie, and Daniel. No Edward. A real chance to talk. Please come, Mom. No Edward. That caught me off guard. I'd assumed he'd be there, looming over the table with his calculated charm. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and let myself imagine it a quiet meal, a chance to see Sophie and Daniel. Maybe even a moment of honesty with Laura. But 30 years of silence whispered warnings. Was this another plea for help? Dressed up as family, or was it something more? I called Clara Nguyen the next morning, meeting her at Popovers for coffee. The cafe was decked out for the holidays, garlands draped over the counter, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon rolls. Clara, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun, listened as I read the note aloud. No, Edward. Huh, she said, sipping her latte. That's something. But you know it's still a risk. Maggie, she hurt you bad last time. I know, I said, tracing the rim of my mug. But Sophie, she was different. Honest. And Daniel, he's struggling. I saw it in his eyes. What if this is a chance to know them? Clara's gaze softened. You're a mother, Maggie. That part of you doesn't turn off. No matter how much they hurt you, just promise me you'll keep your guard up. I will, I promised, though I wasn't sure how. The truth was, I wanted to believe Laura meant it this time. Not for her, but for the girl I'd raised, the one who'd laughed in our tiny kitchen, her hands sticky with biscuit dough. A few days later, Laura called. I was in the shop's back room, sorting through a shipment of children's books, when Tom handed me the phone. It's her, he said, his voice low. I took a deep breath and answered. Laura, Mum, she said, her voice softer than I expected. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I almost didn't, I admitted, leaning against a stack of boxes. What do you want? There was a pause, long enough that I heard the faint crackle of the line. I want to talk, she said finally. Not like Thanksgiving. Just you and me, coffee. Maybe there's a place on State Street, the Daily Grind. Tomorrow at 10, I hesitated, my thumb brushing the edge of the phone. Clara's warning echoed, but so did Sophie's voice, calling out the pretense at that dinner. 1 hour, I said. That's all I'm giving. Thank you, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. I'll see you then. The next morning, I arrived at the Daily Grind early, choosing a corner table with a view of the door. The cafe was warm, the walls lined with local art, the air rich with the smell of espresso. I ordered a black coffee, my hands wrapped around the mug for steadiness. When Laura walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She wore jeans and a simple grey sweater, her hair pulled back, her face bare of the makeup she'd always relied on. She looked older, vulnerable, like the girl I'd raised had peeked through the years. Mom, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Thanks for coming. I nodded, sipping my coffee. You said you wanted to talk, so talk. She ordered a latte almond milk, 1 sugar, exactly 150 degrees. A habit of privilege that hadn't faded. Then she leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. I've been thinking about what you said at Thanksgiving, she began. About the album. About how I shut you out. I'm sorry. I was wrong. The words hung between us, heavy but incomplete. Sorry's a start, I said, my voice even. But 30 years is a long time. Laura, why now? She looked down, her fingers tracing the table's edge. When I saw that article about your bookstore, it hit me. You did all that built something amazing while I was living a lie. Edward's business, our lifestyle, it was all built on fraud. and I ignored the signs because I wanted it to be real. I watched her, searching for the truth. So you reached out because you're losing everything. Not just that, she said quickly, meeting my eyes. I mean, yes, we're in trouble, but it's more. When everything fell apart, I thought about you, how you raised me alone, how you never gave up. I threw that away, and I don't know how to live with it. I took a slow sip, letting her words settle. You were 35 when you told me I was nothing. I said, a grown woman, not a kid. You chose Edward, that life, over me. Now you're sorry because it's gone. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I was wrong, she said, her voice breaking. I was caught up in what I thought I needed. But I miss you, Mom. Not your money, you. I wanted to believe her. But 30 years had taught me caution. Words are easy. Laura, I said, what are you doing to change? I'm trying, she said. I'm looking for work marketing, event planning, Edwards. We're separating after the holidays. I'm staying with Sophie until I get on my feet. I know it's late, but I want to know you again, if you'll let me. We sat in silence, the cafe's hum filling the space. I thought of the album, of the quilt returned unopened, of the nights I'd cried for her. But I also saw the woman before me, stripped of her old armor, asking for a chance, one step at a time. I said finally, I'll come to Christmas, but no promises beyond that. Her face lit up, a shadow of the girl I'd known. Thank you, she whispered. That's more than I deserve. Christmas Day dawned bright and cold, the snow sparkling under a pale sun. I dressed carefully, a green sweater, black slacks, a silver scarf Clara had given me. In my bag were gifts, a first edition economics book for Daniel, a set of watercolor brushes for Sophie, and for Laura. A handwritten book of recipes from our old kitchen biscuits. Meatloaf, apple pie. Joe drove me to Laura's house in the South End. The streets lined with holiday lights. I felt a mix of nerves and resolve, ready to face whatever this day held. Sophie answered the door, a streak of flour on her cheek. Grandma, she said, her surprise genuine. You came, I did, I said, stepping inside. The house felt different, warmer, lived in. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with mismatched ornaments. And the smell of roasting turkey filled the air. Laura emerged from the kitchen, an apron tied over her jeans, her smile hesitant but real. Mom, she said, wiping her hands. I'm so glad you're here. Smells good, I said, offering her the bottle of sparkling cider I'd brought. Need a hand? She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in decades. Sophie's been a lifesaver, but I'm no cook. Come in, please. The living room was cozy, a fire crackling in the hearth. Daniel arrived late, apologizing for a delayed train from Boston. Grandma, he said, his handshake awkward. Good to see you. Dinner was simple but heartfelt turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce from a local farm. Without Edward's presence, the conversation flowed easier. Sophie talked about her upcoming art show, her passion infectious. I'm experimenting with Impressionism, she said, her eyes bright. Monet's my inspiration. I love Monet. I said, surprised. His water lilies always felt like hope to me. Me too, she said, grinning. You should come to my show. Grandma, I might just do that, I said, warmth spreading through me. Daniel was quieter, but he opened up about his job search, the fallout from his father's scandal weighing heavy. It's tough, he admitted, glancing at me. People hear Whittaker and shut the door. You'll find your way, I said. You're more than a name. Laura watched us, her expression soft. After dinner, we exchanged gifts by the tree. My recipe book brought tears to Laura's eyes. I'd forgotten these, she said, tracing the pages. Thank you, Mom. She gave me a photo album, not the formal kind from years past, but candid shots her at a job interview, Sophie painting, Daniel at a piano. I thought you'd want to know us now, she said quietly, not just who we were. As the evening wound down, Sophie drove Daniel to the train station, leaving Laura and me alone. We cleared the dishes, the rhythm familiar despite the years. Thank you for coming, she said, handing me a plate to dry. It means everything. It was nice, I said, choosing the word carefully. More than I expected. She nodded, her eyes searching mine. I know I can't fix the past, Mom, but I want to try. If you'll let me. I looked at her, seeing both the woman who'd hurt me and the girl I'd loved. Small steps. Laura, I said. That's all I can promise. That's enough, she said, and for the first time, I believed her. The snow fell softly outside Broner's Haven Books, dusting the cobblestones of Market Square in a quiet, forgiving blanket. It was late January, and I stood alone in my bookstore in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the glow of a golden light casting long shadows across the shelves. At 68, I'd grown to love the stillness of these late evenings when the last customer had left, and the shop was mine to savor. The air smelled of old books and the faint pine of a lingering holiday wreath, a reminder of the Christmas dinner that had changed everything. After 33 years of silence, Laura's invitation to Thanksgiving had been a spark, and Christmas a tentative thaw. Now, as I held a handwritten letter from her in my hands, I faced a new possibility, a future where our story wasn't defined by endings, but by choices, fragile and unwritten. The weeks since Christmas had been a delicate balance, like stepping onto a frozen pond, testing each step for cracks. Laura and I hadn't rushed into anything, no grand promises, no tearful reunions. Instead, we'd started small, meeting for coffee at the Daily Grind, sharing lunches at popovers, talking about safe things like the weather or the shop's holiday book drive. But beneath the surface, something was growing. Not the fierce, all-consuming love of her childhood, but a cautious connection, built on honesty and boundaries. Sophie had become a bright spot, stopping by the shop to browse or chat about her art. Daniel was more distant, but his emails about business ideas hinted at a bridge we might cross someday. And Laura was trying, not just to rebuild with me, but to rebuild herself. 3 days after Christmas, Laura called. I was in the shop's back room, sorting through a donation of used books, when Tom Rivera handed me the phone. "It's your daughter," he said, his voice gentle. I took a deep breath. "Laura, Mom," she said, her tone steady but heavy. "I wanted you to know Edward's been arrested again. More charges. It's bad." I leaned against a stack of boxes. The news not surprising but still heavy. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "That must be hard for you and the kids." "It is," she admitted, "but it's different now. A month ago, I'd have panicked, begged for help. Now, I'm just facing it. Sophie's letting me stay with her, and I've got a job interview next week. I wanted you to know, not because I need anything, but because you're family." Family. The word still caught in my throat, but it didn't hurt as much anymore. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "Good luck with the interview." We hung up, and I stood there, the phone warm in my hand, feeling something new, not hope. Exactly, but a quiet certainty that we were finding our way. A week later, Sophie dropped by the shop, her scarf dusted with snow. She wandered the art section, her fingers trailing over a book about Monet. "Hey, Grandma," she said, catching my eye. "Got any recommendations for impressionist techniques?" I smiled, joining her. "This one's good," I said, pulling a book from the shelf. "It's got a great section on light and shadow. You painting something new, trying to," she said, tucking the book under her arm. I've got a show coming up. It's kind of a big deal. You should come. I'd like that, I said, warmth spreading through me. We ended up in my office, sharing coffee from the shop's machine, talking about her work. She showed me photos on her phone, vibrant canvases of seascapes and city lights, each one alive with emotion. You've got a gift. Sophie, I said, scrolling through the images. These feel like stories. Thanks, she said, her smile shy. Mom says I get my stubbornness from you. I think it's the art, too. I laughed, surprised. Laura said that, yeah. Sophie said, sipping her coffee. She's been talking about you more. Not just the bad stuff. The good. Too like how you used to read her stories. I think she's trying to figure out how to make things right. I nodded, unsure what to say. Sophie's visit left me lighter, like a window had opened in a room long closed. We made plans to meet for coffee the next month. A small commitment that felt like a promise. Daniel was slower to connect, his loyalty to Edward a tangled knot. But a few days later, an email arrived, polite but curious, asking for advice on starting a consulting business. I read about your investments. Grandma, he wrote, any tips for someone starting over? I replied with a few suggestions, careful not to overstep, and offered to introduce him to a contact in Boston. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The letter came in mid-January, tucked into a pile of mail Tom left on my desk. Laura's handwriting stopped me cold. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I opened it in the shop after closing, the only light coming from a lamp on the counter. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, and a short story she'd written. The title was simple, The Bridge. It told of a mother and daughter, separated by years and choices, finding each other on a fragile bridge over a river. The prose was raw, unpolished, but every word felt true. At the bottom, she'd written, I don't know if you'll want to read this, Mom, but I'll keep writing. For you, for me, for us. I sat there, the shop silent around me, the snow falling outside. The story wasn't perfect, but it was honest. A piece of Laura I hadn't seen since she was a girl. Scribbling poems in our old kitchen. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened, like ice melting under a spring sun. I folded the letter and placed it in my album, not the old one, heavy with rejection. But a new one I'd started, with photos from Christmas, Sophie's art show flyer, Daniel's email. Clara came by the next day, her coat dusted with snow. We sat in the shop's reading nook, sharing a pot of tea. You're glowing. Maggie, she said, her eyes sharp. What's got you so light? I showed her the letter. The story. Laura's trying, I said, really trying. It's not perfect, but it's something. Clara read it, her expression softening. She's got your heart, buried under all that mess. But it's there, maybe, I said, smiling. I'm not rushing into anything, but I'm not running away either. You've come a long way, she said, squeezing my hand. You didn't just find Laura, you found yourself. She was right. Broner's Haven Books wasn't just a shop, it was my legacy, a place where stories connected strangers, where kids read in beanbag chairs, where retirees debated politics over coffee. I'd started a scholarship fund for single parents, hosted writing workshops for seniors, even mentored young entrepreneurs like Sophie. My life was full. Not because Laura had come back, but because I'd built it, piece by piece, from the ashes of those empty years. One snowy evening, Laura called with news of a job interview, a marketing role at a local non-profit. It's not much, she said, but it's a start. I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you, I said, and meant it. Keep me posted. I will, she said, her voice warm. Maybe we can grab lunch next week. Let's do it, I said. And as I hung up, I realized how far we'd come. Not back to the mother and daughter we'd been, but to something new, messier, more honest. That night, I sat in the shop, the letter on the counter beside Pride and Prejudice. The snow fell thicker, a curtain between me and the world. I thought of the girl Laura had been, the woman she was becoming, and the woman I'd fought to be. At 68, I'd learned that life doesn't give perfect endings, but it offers new pages, blank and waiting. I didn't know if Laura and I would ever fully heal, but we were writing our story, one word at a time. I stood, locking the shop, and stepped into the snowy night. The air was cold, but the lights of Market Square glowed, a promise of tomorrow. I wasn't the Maggie Sullivan who'd stood in the rain 33 years ago, broken by her daughter's rejection. I was a woman who'd found her own light, who'd chosen love not out of need, but out of strength, and that, I knew, was enough. Well, my dear friends, we've walked with Maggie Sullivan through 30 years of heartbreak and hard-won light, haven't we? It's Eva, back on my Eufaula porch, still feeling Maggie's courage in my bones. As her, I've shed every tear, every page of that album, and every quiet hope sparked by Laura's letter. Maggie taught me that at 68. We can still write new chapters, not to erase the past, but to shine brighter for it. If her story warmed your heart, please subscribe to our little storytelling family. We've got more to share. Now, as I sip my tea, I'm wondering what's a moment in your life where you found light after loss. Drop a comment, sweet ladies, and let's keep this porch chat going. Until next time, keep shining.